And a good football Friday morning. Eagles fans, how are you today? Getting ready for some Sunday football action. You got the Mac and Mac guys to chop it up with you for the next 2 hours, or at least the show's going to do 2 hours. It might not be Mac and Mac the entire time. We're going all hands on deck here today. We'll give you the details as we go along. But Johnny Mac, yesterday you had practice duty. Good to see Jordan Davis back out there on the field. And good to hear from him again afterwards, because he's just an excitable kid who loves playing football, and it was good to hear him again. The first question I have for you today is, will we see him on Sunday with that big 9-0 on his back in the game for the Philadelphia Eagles?
I think so. I don't see why not. Obviously, I don't think the Eagles are going to let on till Saturday at 4:00, but he certainly seems healthy. He certainly seems happy. He certainly seems ready to go. And, the one issue I think that everyone had, and you kind of see it with big guys, you see it all the time with Joel Embiid when he gets hurt, and, conditioning, and is he going to be ready to go? And I think that was the most positive part. Jordan rolled out. He lost 20 pounds during his rehab. He's been, the training and strength staffs took advantage of the time, sort of dual roles to rehab the ankle, plus work on his conditioning, and he's lost 20 pounds. So that was the one thing I was concerned about. Maybe the Eagles wanted, to ramp him up more than a week, to get that conditioning down. But it seems like the conditioning isn't a problem. It's gotten better as he was injured. So I see no reason why he shouldn't be out there against Derrick Henry and the Tennessee Titans. And that's a good development, because now you have two big nose tackles in there, and you can play those 5-man fronts, and you can, put them both on a pitch count and use them both however you want. I think it's big, and even bigger than this week, Jody. I think long term it's big, because those are both really, really good players. I'm talking about Jordan Davis and Linval Joseph, and they're players the Eagles need to play the style of defense they want to play. They need that player, and they have two of them now, and that's a big positive.
Different people are certainly built, are different physiques. There's some people, if someone loses 20 pounds, you go, oh my God, where did you go? And it stands out like a sore thumb. A guy the size of Jordan Davis, you might not notice immediately that they've dropped 20 pounds. It certainly was reported that way. He said he dropped weight during the rehab that he had to go through. Could you tell just by looking at him?
No. Well, number one, he's a former Georgia player, obviously. I think he's from South Carolina, but he doesn't like the cold. So it was cold yesterday. So he was bundled up. He's just a big guy. But when he's, before he lost the 20 pounds, he's not one of those guys you mentioned. Everybody's different. There are certain guys that look, they're 350-pound guys. They're big. They look a little bit overweight. Jordan Davis never looked like that. Like, he's a guy who can carry the weight on his frame because he's so enormous. He's so big. Jordan Mailata the same way. When you see Jordan Mailata, you don't say, oh, there's a big 380-pound guy, but he can carry 380 pounds, and it doesn't look crazy. Jordan's the same way, Jordan Davis. So number one, he never looked drastically overweight to begin with, just because of the huge size he has and the frame he has. So no, he's always looked good. So when people talked about conditioning, they weren't talking about the way he looked, or at least people who see him every day. They were talking about he didn't play that much at Georgia. Right. And he didn't play that much at Georgia because they were so deep and so good, and they didn't have to play him that much. So I think that,
and to be honest, he didn't play that much for the Eagles either.
No,
they've been using
he's not
him
used to it. And there is something to, you got to get used to it. I mean, long distance runners, they're in tremendous shape, but they still got to get used to going to 26.2 when they got to go to do a marathon. You got to work up to it. And same thing with Jordan Davis.
And if you don't think that it's a strain to play defensive tackle in the National Football League, look at a guy like Fletcher Cox just a couple of weeks ago when they hadn't added the depth to the defensive tackle position when Jordan Davis first went out and he had to play 70 snaps. He was like, I feel like you know what, because you're not used to taking that many reps, that many hits, that many poundings in the National Football League. And Fletcher's been doing it for a decade. His conditioning has to be up to par, and he still got worn down by the amount of snaps that he had to play. So the Eagles have the ability now, with Jordan Davis coming back, to sub liberally, to have guys in and out of that lineup and keep everybody fresh. And they're going to need it for Sunday against the Tennessee Titans because Derrick Henry comes to town. Number 2 rushing back in the National Football League. Has been the best back in the league. You want to say last 2 years, 5 years, wherever you want to draw the line. Chances are you're going to say Derrick Henry's name. He's been that good. And the Eagles have had some issues. Not a week in, week out. This is the glaring hole on the team. But to ignore it would also be unfair and inaccurate. This is not a strength of the Philadelphia Eagles stopping the run. The first week that they added Sue and Linval Joseph, they certainly were better at it. I think they added a little energy into it. This past week, the Packers, didn't rush it all that often because the Eagles grabbed an early lead. So their amount of running was going to come back to the pack a little bit. A.J. Dillon, when he ran it, and is a very comparable back to Derrick Henry, in that they're both big, strong, physical backs, ran it pretty darn effectively when he ran it. Derrick Henry is going to be the key to this game, Johnny Mac, unless the Eagles can do what they did last week, which was get out to a 2-touchdown lead before you blink. It's going to be Derrick Henry left, Derrick Henry right, and Derrick Henry up the middle for Tennessee.
Yeah, and that's how Tennessee wants to play. It's funny. I've been joking all week. The first thing everything says is to the Mike Vrabel team, toughness, physicality. That's the first thing they say. It's almost like you have to say it. But it's real. It's also real. I mean, that's the type of player he is. That's the type of way he wants his team to be. I talked to A.J. Brown about this for a long time. He wants his team to play that way. He wants his team to be tough and more physical. And he builds his team that way. And that's how they play. And you're right. And by the way, they've been very successful. This will be the 4th consecutive year they've made the playoffs, I believe. Last year, they were the number 1 seed before the disappointing ouster in the playoffs. They're a very good team, and they play that way. But when you play that way, and I talk about it all the time, there is a smaller margin for error. And one of those smaller margins is you got to play from the lead by and large, or at least stay within 1 score. So you can stick with that running game, so you can be disciplined with it. And yeah, if the Eagles get up by 2 scores, 2 touchdowns, then it changes the whole flow of the game, and Tennessee's probably in some trouble. One of the issues, the Titans are a little bit banged up. Nate Davis showed up. We talked to Teron Davenport yesterday. Their offensive line, not great, but they have 2 good players. Nate's one of them. And all of a sudden he shows up on the injury report with a knee, did not participate. So I think that would be very, very big. There's certain guys, Jeffrey Simmons didn't practice defensively. That would be a huge deal. But all indications I get from Teron and other people down there is he's going to play. Derrick Henry didn't practice, but that was not injury related. He's going to play.
Which, by the way, how many guys did the Eagles have listed under rest yesterday?
Yeah, well, that's been all year. That hasn't changed. I said, from week 1, that's not changing. Same guy, same rest. Wednesday's turned into Thursday late in the season. Before it was the Wednesday practice. Now It's the Thursday practice. That's not changing. That's going to continue. And the Eagles, by and large, have stayed very healthy. It's interesting. You take out the rest players, and their injury report looks much better than the Titans, but most of their injuries are on injured reserve, or in the case of C.J. Gardner-Johnson, he might be headed to injured reserve. Who knows? But we know he's out. We know Dallas Goedert's out. We know Avonte Maddox is out. So most of their injuries are more clearly defined. It's going to be an interesting game, Jody. You know, we'll get to it. I'm only going to be here for the first hour, but I haven't picked the Eagles to lose all season. I had a really difficult time with this one. For a lot of reasons, and one of them is there's no juice to these intra-conference games. Like there's no, you know, with the Giants coming up next week, it's the Giants. Tennessee's a better team. But I guarantee there's going to be more juice for the Giants than Tennessee. And you see this across the league. It's just, you don't see a team much. There's no real, except for A.J. Brown. Obviously, he wants to play very well against this team.
I was going to, thanks, you went there for me. A.J. Brown and
there's one guy, though. It's not
is it really,
else.
though, John? That was one of the questions I wrote down today. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, we saw Nick Sirianni get overly excited after the game when they came from behind and beat the Colts. And he said all the right things leading up to the game. And then all of a sudden, the emotion burst out of him when the game was over. So you knew he was keeping it under wraps. We took some points here on our stream. I took calls on WIP. Oh, Sirianni called a bad game. Sirianni was too emotional during that. It showed in the play calling, which I thought was blatantly overstated. I don't really believe that. Was there some maybe, but people were, oh, that's the only thing Sirianni worried about, beating the Colts. That's why they called the game the way they did. No, I don't, not really. But do you think there's any chance that the play calling slides A.J. Brown's way, that they will attempt to getting A.J. Brown the ball? I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's usually a very good thing. But do you think they'll overdo it in an attempt to let him have the kind of game he wants against his former squad?
I don't think they're going to overdo it. I think it's natural to slide it in that direction because Tennessee's really good at stopping the run. They're really good again. They're really bad at stopping the pass. So number one, in theory, you would think you'd want to throw the ball against this defense. And he's your best receiver. So I think some of it is just natural. I think it's a bigger deal with the head coach because the head coach is the head coach and the head coach can put his thumb on the scale. And the head coach, it's a big deal when he sees something as a coach. A.J. Brown, as I said, is just one player and he's a receiver. And receivers by nature are at the mercy of a lot of people to get involved in the game, starting with the quarterback and the coach and the offensive coordinator and the play caller. So, you know, I think it's a bigger deal with the head coach. I see this all the time. I've seen it for years. It's not just this week. It happens every week all across the NFL for every team. There are rivalry games, and obviously Dallas week is a bigger deal around Philadelphia than Tennessee week. But you see these intra-conference games, and yeah, there's not as much juice. It's real. There's not as much juice in these games. You'll see it with your Jets. I think your Jets are going to go into Minnesota and throw for 350 yards against one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. And Jody McDonald, I'm not going to speak for you, but you're probably going to get really excited by that. And then next week, and I don't know who the Jets have next week, it's going to come down to, it's going to come back down to reality, especially if it's an AFC East game. Same thing in the NFC East. There's just not as much juice to these games, and it's true. It really is.
All right. I think the juice, if the Eagles can't get juiced up by facing the best back in the National Football League, shame on them. All right.
Well, I don't mean they're completely looking. I just mean compared to other games, there's less juice to these intra-conference games.
All right. We'll
only play 17 of them.
After this one is over and done, we'll compare to what the Giants are next week because that should be a juiceful game. It's a division game. It's a rivalry game. We'll see if there's that much more juice to it. Derrick Henry's average numbers this year, not his best games, not his worst games, his average games. He averages 22 carries per game. You think he's doing more or less against Eagles this week?
Can you tell me the score in the fourth quarter?
That would be up to you, big guy. I'm asking you
that's
to
all
look into the crystal ball, and that includes the crystal ball of the score, which dictates the number of carries that he gets. So the number is over under 22. You going under or over?
I would go over. But again, and that's why those things are largely meaningless to me, because it depends on it depends on how the game goes. If Tennessee is being successful and Tennessee's playing well, and I'm going to give you a hint, I'm going to pick Tennessee to win the game, so that's why I'm going over. Then he's going over. If they're not, if they're behind by 2 scores, then he's going under. I think they're going to be somewhat successful. I can't pick the Eagles to win every single stinking game, so I feel like I need to pick somebody else at some point. So this week seems to be the best way to go. So from that standpoint, I think they're going to win the game. So I think he's going to go over that number. If they get behind by 2 scores, Jody, not getting that number.
Okay, yeah, 4.2 yards per carry. You going over on that one too?
Yeah, I mean the Eagles, and it's interesting because Derrick has hit this lull. I think it was 2.2 versus the Bengals. He's been under. He might be under 3. I don't have it in front of me over the past 3 games, where guys have he's had a really difficult time. Part of that is the Titans' offensive line, but the Eagles aren't going to play that style of defense. They're going to play the light boxes and hope to. So they're not equipped to do that, and they're okay with that. That's built into their philosophy.
Right.
So
they may be. I'm not. And Jonathan Gannon, the other day, you were there when he gave his explanation as to how the Bengals were able to hold Derrick Henry to 2 points. He never once said because they put an extra guy in the box. Not once. Now, he's a defensive coordinator in the National Football League. He knows how to break down tape. He knows exactly what went down. He gave this long-winded dancing all around it without ever coming out and saying, well, they dedicated an extra guy to the run. Why? Because he's not going to do that on Sunday. And when Derrick Henry goes for 120 yards and rushes for 5 yards a clip, you better hope it's only 1 touchdown and not 2, Eagles fans. Jonathan Gannon is going to have to answer that question from Johnny Mack or somebody else come next Happy Tuesday. Well, why didn't you commit an extra guy to the running game when Derrick Henry was running it the way he was running it? He's John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. We are Birds 365. J-Mac stand for the first hour. Then he's got to run and get inside information from Nick Sirianni. Barrett Brooks is going to join me in hour number 2. Our guest in hour number 2 is going to be Jimmy Kempski from Philly Voice. Our guest in hour number 1, and he's up next, is our very own Joe Sandler-Laquido. He jumps in on Birds 365.